Hi, everyone. Today we're going to talk about China reunifies. So, we talked about this a little bit yesterday when we were going over the period of disunion and what that meant. So, the period of disunion is when something that is a union has since been torn apart. So, you were once a whole, you're a union, and then when you disunify, that means you break apart. So, we're going to talk about the dynasties that came out of the period of disunion. So, after the period of disunion, what dynasties came about, and then specifically characteristics for each of those dynasties. So let's talk about disorder and disunification. So China split into rival kingdoms after the Han Dynasty collapsed. So the Han Dynasty collapses and the rival kingdoms all break into small parts. So during this time, Chinese culture spread. So as the kingdoms are breaking apart, China itself actually is getting larger because those outlying kingdoms are starting to conquer lands around them. So they're actually spreading their culture. And now that they're also trading within each other as well, they're spreading their culture. And each of the kingdoms have their own little parts of their culture that are different traditions than others. So you're going to start to see kind of a blending of different Chinese cultures here. So let's talk about the Sui dynasty first. Yongjing unified China. So he was the one that really brought China back together after this disunion. And this is from 590 to 618 AD. He is responsible for the command to build the Grand Canal. So we talked about this a little bit yesterday as well. The Grand Canal links northern and southern China. It is a trade route. It's a way to get materials from north to south. It's a way for people to move from north to south. So it just really created kind of a link. So you could think of it as like links in a chain. It linked North and South China. So this is a picture of what the Grand Canal looks like today. The Grand Canal, the technology has lasted over 2,000 years, and it actually was used, that same technology was used in several other canals around the world. The Panama Canal is another example of this type of canal. We're going to watch a video that you'll take Cornell notes on. We'll watch that at the end. There's also going to be another video we're going to watch at the end that really shows the construction and how the different channels within the canal work. So we're going to watch a couple different videos on the Grand Canal. The Tang Dynasty is our next dynasty. And this is from 618 to 907 AD. It's called the Golden Age of China. The first emperor is Li Yuan, and he led a revolt with his son to establish the Tang dynasty. So you can see the Tang dynasty here. It conquered most of what was China. I would say a good half of what was China before the disunion. So they're starting to slowly gain back their land. They established tributary states. These are states that remained independent but had to acknowledge Chinese supremacy and send tribute. So basically, we covered this kind of with other empires where as they conquered different territories, they allowed those kings to stay in that territory and remain independent of that territory and rule that territory under them. But they knew that there was a higher emperor that they still had to answer to and pay taxes to. This is a very similar idea. So these tributary states, they would conquer them. So the Tang Dynasty, they expanded, they conquered these new lands, and they were part of the Tang Dynasty. But they allowed the rulers to stay and rule that territory because, as we've seen many times in history, as things get too large, they get too large to rule for one person alone. So they allowed them to remain independent and the rulers stayed to help rule their area, but they still had to acknowledge the Chinese supremacy and send tribute, which is like a tax. Empress Wu was part of the Tang Dynasty. She is the only empress to ever rule China. So, granted, she ruled China while her husband was very sick. And then after he died, she still remained ruler, which is very, very unheard of, especially during this time period anywhere in the world. We've talked about it many times before that women weren't seen as strong enough to rule. However, she had a very strong character, and she was very harsh, and she was fair, but she was harsh. She was a very strict ruler. During the decline of the Tang Dynasty came after Empress Wu, and it was full of corruption, high taxes that people could not possibly pay. They were rebelling, and there was a drought, which led to a famine. A famine means extreme starvation. So obviously, if there's a drought, you can't eat, you can't. There's no crops or anything. So famine is the next step after a drought, extreme starvation, and then rebellions because of the high taxes. And the third dynasty is the Song Dynasty. It lasts from 960 to 1279 AD. It is called another golden age of China. And another golden age of China. So you can see here the Song Dynasty is just a little bit smaller than the Tang Dynasty. The main difference being the Tang Dynasty did have kind of a finger, an appendage of land coming out into central China, where the Song Dynasty does not. One thing that was made very popular during the Song Dynasty is called foot binding. Foot binding are when the feet of young women were bound very, very tightly with cloth to keep them very small. It was seen as beautiful to have small feet. You can see here that the foot is just slightly longer than the calf is wide. So just kind of something, I don't know if it's interesting, but a tradition that they held in the Song Dynasty. You can see what it ends up happening to the person's foot. The toes actually curl completely under, because this is done when they were very, very young, all the way through adulthood. Women were often carried through the streets in like canopies and in crates because they couldn't even walk because it was so painful. So that was just kind of a little bit of interesting facts thrown in. The age of Buddhism, you're going to read this section in your textbook and write your notes in the empty section on your Cornell notes. So make sure you focus on Buddhism and how it develops during this time period. We'll talk much more about Buddhism during this whole chapter, but this is just a little bit of an insight on Buddhism. So finally, make sure you mark up your notes. Remember that marking them up and finishing your summary, adding questions, this accounts for half of the points for your Cornell notes. So please do not skip this step. You need to fill in the section for your notes that are blank from the videos and the textbook, underline or bold vocabulary and keywords, highlight main ideas in each section. Each section must have a question in the questioning column, either of your own or from the presentation. We're going to go over that in just a minute. And then you also want to answer the essential question in your summary in about 2 to 3 sentences. So let's take a look at the different sections. So the different sections are the Song Dynasty, the Tang Dynasty, and the Sui Dynasty. So you could even keep a very similar question as what are characteristics for each of these dynasties. And that could be the question that's next to each topic. So the Sui Dynasty, what are characteristics of the Sui Dynasty? Or when did the Sui Dynasty begin and end? And then you could use similar questions for your other dynasties. For the Grand Canal, how was the Grand Canal built? Who built the Grand Canal? When was it built? Any of those questions would be great for the Grand Canal. So just make sure you have questions on the questioning side of your Cornell notes. And that completes 7.1. Just a quick overview of the three dynasties that happened right after the disunion of China.